Tom, you're the costume designer on Z, the beginning of everything. Why don't you talk us through how you became involved in the show?
So I became involved in the show by way of the producer, actually. One of the producers, Kathy, I had worked with a couple times before. She was one of the supervising producers. And we had worked on a couple projects together. And randomly, I had met and worked with Christina I had met Christina once. And so we got along. And my agent, I made the script and I fell in love with the script, and then became sort of obsessed with trying to actually make this happen. Because I was like, okay, I've got to do this. There's no question. I have to do this project. So
yeah, I would have thought for a costume designer, something like this would have just been like, I don't know, completely. You just had to do it, right?
No, completely. I mean, it was just the idea of Christina Ricci and the idea of Zelda Fitzgerald and post-war America and, design and all that sort of stuff. I just couldn't wait to get my hands all over it.
So when you land a project like this, what are some of the first things that you did to prepare for the task?
Well, one of the ways in which I prepared was to pick up all of the books about Zelda Fitzgerald and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and sort of voraciously started reading all of the biographies and some of the literature, and then started going through all of there's I don't want to say there's a fair amount of photos, but it's sort of enough photos to get the initial idea of what they look like and who they were and who these people sort of were. And there's sort of a lot written about them, but that's sort of the tricky part also about a project like this, is that you're not just mimicking these people, and you're not, Christina is playing a real life person and David is playing a real life person. And so you want to figure out how the clothes are going to tell the story, but also reinforce, whatever story we're telling, and not be exact replicas of what we're doing, because there's only, first of all, there's only so many photos you can look at. And then there were a few times when we actually did replicate certain specific looks based upon certain pictures, because the storytelling part of that lent itself to really copying that idea. But you really just sort of want to give the essence of the person. So we really, I bought every catalog, every magazine, all the, fashion things and photo research I could do everywhere. And then, went and spent lots of time at the library and different archives at different places. And, there's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I can imagine there is. And most of us know at least something about Zelda, and especially F. Scott. They're names that we're familiar with, even if we don't know anything about their lives. And I'm wondering, when you started really delving deep and digging and to understand how you were going to tackle these costumes, did anything go against your expectations, or is there anything that surprised you about them?
Well, one of the things that surprised me, I think, generally, because we have, like you were saying, when we hear those two names, we sort of go, oh my God, I know who those people are. And because so much of what he wrote about was sort of a veiled version of their relationship. So, clearly I think everyone goes, oh, well, it's The Great Gatsby. It's, so it's those two people. And so, in your mind, I think all along is you sort of process that in your head. But then when you actually start reading about them, and you start reading about his life in particular, and how he wasn't, you picture him, on some level as Leonardo DiCaprio. It just sort of is like, because The Great Gatsby, that movie was so powerful. Yeah. But, he wasn't a good student, and he had issues, he had problems writing, and, his desire a lot of times was just to be famous and to make good on his, he really wanted to marry her, and and his relationship with his parents, and his family, which wasn't necessarily well off. And, and then with her southernness and all of that issue, and then sort of the Southern Belle, and how young she actually was, and her desire to be an artist, but never being able to really truly express it. And that's, I think, one of the really interesting things about Zelda, is that she in her own way was way, way far ahead of her time. But somehow, because of the world in which she lived in at that particular moment, she couldn't quite get past where she needed to be sort of be on the other side. So much of her creativity and her desire to create was sort of hidden behind him. And so I think that was part of the clash between their relationship, because this woman clearly had talent, but couldn't quite, on some level, figure out how to express it. And so at the time, it was hard, because women were only really, on some level, coming into their own. And I don't think she was strong enough to be able to come on, and do it on her own.
Yeah, absolutely. The show obviously tackles different time periods, different locations, as we go from Southern Belle to later on in her life. And costume is so critical for us as the audience to latch on to something, to kind of get into that time period. What would you say was the different challenges in kind of portraying those different time periods?
Well, I mean, that was one of the fantastic, great things, and also one of, like you're saying, one of the ginormous challenges of the show, because it really does go from basically 1917 to 1921. And during that 4-year period, the style of dress really changed, and the silhouette of the dress really changed. And so it was very important to us. And also, she was going, and her journey as a person, going from this Southern Belle to this person, the Southern girl in New York, to sort of claiming her authority as an icon, so to speak, before she really hits her true iconography. But all of that journey was very important for us to tell. And also, seasonally, you want to tell the story as well. There were certain times when we were in winter and summer and all that sort of stuff, and flashing back and forth. And, it was very important, because I think so much of television now is binge watching. And so this is the sort of perfect show to binge watch, because it's only a half an hour. And so basically it's a 5-hour movie, and that's how we were sort of looking at it. And so it was really important to make sure that the journey of the person and the journey of the clothes were matching that. And so to really also making strong choices to understand that, we've gone 2 years ahead, and now we've gone 2 more years ahead, and to sort of, wait, we're not in Montgomery anymore, and so now we're up here. And so the silhouette also is changing because of so many things that were going on in the life of the female person, and transportation and all this sort of stuff in America was happening, and jazz, and all this kind of stuff, which led itself to a change in the silhouette. And also, we wanted to also make a big change between when we were in the South and when we were in the North. And we did that by way of fabrics and by way of color and silhouette. So you have those 3 things to kind of play with, and making sure that those 3 things really were reinforcing the story.
So when you take on a period, sorry, I'm just gonna, there's a delay. When you take on a period, I think there would be a lot of temptation to embellish and go over the top. Are you conscious of that, and always trying to pair it back to like the truth of the character?
I think so. I don't know necessarily that I had an epiphany at some point, but I did have sort of early on in the process, when we were trying to get sort of a hold of what it was and what the story was going to be, and how to sort of make sure that the clothes were telling the story, and not making the clothes just sort of museum pieces, and making it just sort of this idea of like, oh, well, let's just, just find a bunch of vintage clothes and just throw vintage clothes on the people and that will be good and all that sort of stuff. And, it's sort of, it's a tricky mix that you have to do because some things you're making from scratch, other things you're ripping dresses apart and combining two dresses into one dress. And, you're taking some dresses, the bottom half, and making the top on another half and all that sort of stuff, and so the mix, and you also want to make sure that the costume and the clothes are reinforcing the story and the actor. Like, so in modern, I've done a lot of modern dress, so it was always constantly going, but this person at this time, what was their modern point? It's like there had to be this element of like, well, who are they and where do they go shopping and what do they do and where are they coming from? All of those questions that we ask today in a modern show, we had to ask all of those same things in a period show and make sure that it was feeling contemporary and not like just sort of a, oh, let's just hang out at the museum for a little while.
Yeah, that's exactly what many of us kind of sometimes expect and sometimes don't necessarily want to see in a period piece. We want it to be real.
Right.
Given that we're Gold Derby, let's talk about awards for a little while. I'd be really interested to get your perspective on this. When you go back in history and look at what the Academy, both film and TV academies, have honored or awarded, they tend to go for the big period pieces, the frilly dresses and that kind of thing. And contemporary costumes sometimes get a bit of a short shrift. What do you think about that? Do you think contemporary costume designing is can be just as challenging?
Oh, I think, okay, I'll get on my high horse for a little, I'll get on my soapbox for a very brief moment.
Please do.
So I think there are a lot of costume designers who do contemporary clothing that would say contemporary design is one of the hardest things you can ever do. And partly that is because in contemporary design, people have so many opinions about it because we're all in a contemporary time period. We're all now. And so since we're all now and we're all wearing clothes, people tend to have a lot of opinion about now. And so as someone said once, they were doing a big period, grand operatic period thing. And he would say, oh yeah, the producers never gave me notes on anything. Cut to his next project was, a contemporary modern day thing. And he said every day, the producers would be like, I don't like that t-shirt. I don't like that shirt. I don't like that dress. And it's like, but what you're not understanding is it's right for the character. And the costume designer is creating a world for that character and that world for that character. And the thing about contemporary design that so many people don't also understand is that we live in a time period now, which is 2017, right? So the character also lives in 2017, but that character also may shop at one store one day. The next day they'll shop in a vintage store. And then the next day they'll shop somewhere else. And also I have clothes from when I was 20 years old still hanging out in my closet. And I still have clothes when I was, 10 years ago, and so contemporary design is more than just what people think of. It's like, oh, well, you just go shopping. You just go out to the store and you go to the big department store and you just go and pull a bunch of clothes and that's that. But when you really build a character and when you really work with trying to define a character, that character's life is all over the place. It's like, it's like your home. Your home, you may have a chair that you bought 30 years ago, and you may have dishes which are antique, which were your mother's or your grandmother's. And then you might have, a chair that was your, father's from his college days or whatever. So the mix of it is so much greater than what people actually think of contemporary design.
Yeah, and you would know, you've done quite a lot of it. You worked in Treatment House of Cards. But those of us who are awards watchers, we remember, even this year when La La Land was nominated in costume design, about 5-6 years ago, I Am Love, Antonella Canarozzi was nominated for that really amazing contemporary design in that film. You say that it's difficult and it's challenging for those particular reasons, but have you got any particular examples from your own work where it was really difficult to try to get the character right because they were just in our time period?
Well, I think you make it. I mean, I think, well, just a general example is, you can have an image of your head in your head of what you want the character to be or to walk in. Say you go, oh, I want her in, she's going to start the scene and I need her to be in a red dress. And that red dress has to say these 5 things. And in saying those 5 things, that red dress also has to move and it has to do this. And when she walks, I want a very specific, I have a cat in the back. So I don't know.
It's fine.
And you wanted to do a couple of things. Well, you go to the store, you look around, all you find is, all the designers this season did blue dresses. They only did blue dresses. That happens a lot all of a sudden, or you're shooting your show in spring and all of a sudden you need a fall winter dress and that's not in, that happens a lot as well. So you have to design the dress and you have to make the dress, and therefore you have to create this thing which doesn't exist but still has to reinforce the character, reinforce the story, and also, be part of the world, and it's also contemporary at the same time.
Yeah, I think it would be super challenging. But this is going to be a really cool segue now. So speaking of awards, you've been nominated 7 times for SNL and once for 30 Rock, and you won for the SNL Jimmy Fallon Justin Timberlake extravaganza. There would have been so much really interesting work that you did on that episode. But talk us through the winning an Emmy and how exciting that was for you.
Well, it was really, it was pretty, I have to say, it's pretty thrilling. And I don't think you really realize what it is until you win one. Then you're sort of like, oh, wow, okay, I get it. I think, and to me, it's always been, the nomination has always been amazing. And that truly is, like they say, it really is true. It is an honor to be nominated at all, that kind of recognition. And that's also why with the Costume Designer Guild Awards, I always feel like those nominations are pretty amazing and important as well, because they come from costume designers. And so costume designers a lot of times are able to look at your work in a completely different way than, say, the rest of Hollywood and the rest of the industry. Yeah. And so those kinds of nominations and awards are always, I don't want to say one is more amazing than the other, but it was interesting because at the time I won the Emmy for SNL, it was a juried award. And so the jury at that point decided that they were going to, we had been nominated a couple times, and I got a phone call saying that we had won and all that sort of stuff. And so it was pretty amazing to be able to actually be in the auditorium and then know that you actually won, as opposed to just sitting there sort of waiting. And then all of a sudden, your category comes and then they don't call your name, and then you're like, okay, great. Time to go to the bar.
Wow. So this might be really hard for you because you've done so much work on SNL, but what would you say was the most fun or the most ridiculous design that you had to come up with for that show?
Wow, that's a really,
there's so much.
I know. It's like I've been there so long. It's like every week is a new sort of. And that is the one thing that's sort of interesting about that show as well, is that you think that you've done it all and you think that, you've got it. And then every week something new happens when you go, okay, new challenge. Never thought I would have to encounter this or anything. I mean, I think, you know, working with Jimmy is always amazing, and working with Jimmy and Justin, that whole like thing they do about Omeleteville and, you know,
Yeah,
the Christmas wrapping paper thing and all that sort of stuff. That those two sketches have always been amazing to design, and you know, they're always fun to work on. You know, the whole show is amazing. I mean, I happen to be blessed with the ability to kind of, I like my job so much that I like, you know, shopping at Salvation Army just as much as I like shopping at the fancy department store. You know, and so
that's pretty cool. Looking back at costume design over the last few decades, what do you think has influenced you the most, or what would you say when you think about that's really amazing costume design? Is there anything in particular that comes to mind from film and television?
Over the last couple of years, I mean, I'm always obsessed with looking at the old 30s, all of those old 30s movies, and, you know, the work of Adrian, who was just, you know, and all of those old Fred and Ginger movies, and, you know, certainly watching The Women and things like The Wizard of Oz, and these just sort of amazing, or any of the, you know, basically amazing work. And every decade has some sort of, you know, amazing film to study and to look at and to watch. And, you know, I think looking at the work of Ellen Mirojnick is so inspiring, and just, you know, and her range of design is pretty epic, and Sandy Powell and Colleen Atwood. And, you know, I'm obsessed just with design in general. I mean, I love watching any kind of film that, you know, has any sort of, I think you can learn from any film, and looking at any piece of art and sort of seeing how someone else is telling the story and how someone else is doing something. You know, I think the work on Transparent is incredible. I mean, I think that work is really, her work on that show is just like beyond how she's defined Los Angeles and a very specific part of Los Angeles, in addition to taking on, you know, the work of someone who's transitioning, you know, into a very different part of their life is, you know, amazing.
And thinking about Emmys, given that Z is going to be on the ballot in many categories, has there been any thought being put into what episode would be submitted for your work? Would it be the early stuff, the Southern Belle stuff? Would it be stuff later on from the season?
No, it was the episode that we actually ended up putting in was the episode 6, where they're in the speakeasy. So it's sort of the general range of,
yeah.
There were a lot of clothes and a lot of, you know, it's a lot of fashion. It sort of shows a big range of social classes, and a lot of dance, and a lot of things that are happening. And, you know, I got the chance to design those showgirls who were on stage with all the feathers and all that sort of stuff. And so, and as an aside, I play the tailor in that episode.
Oh,
so I was
perfect.
I was like, okay, well, I'm going to nominate this because I'm in it.
That's brilliant. Tom, look, we hope to see you back at the Emmys for Z, and congratulations on a great show, and good luck for season 2 as well.
Please, thank you so much.